Good afternoon. Welcome to the Douglas County Chamber's Greystone Power Luncheon. I'm Alan Smith, Extreme Images. I'm the 2012 Chairman of the Board for your Douglas County Chamber of Commerce. We are anxiously waiting to hear what Dr. Smith has to say about our 2012 economic forecast. But before we start today's program, I would like to invite our sponsor, T. Dennis Connolly, Consultant, PC, Certified Public Accountant, to come forward and say a few words.
It's going to be more than a few words. We've got Washington, D.C. and the IRS looking at everything we do. We are indeed grateful to be your sponsor today, and this year marks a milestone in my firm. We have, with my staff over here, over 100 years of tax expertise and accounting. And I would like for my staff to stand at this moment. Donna Cox, EA, Karen Waits, EA, Lisa Shelnut, Donna K. Clifton, Sarah Igman, Cass Harris, and my beautiful wife of 54 years. I would also like to congratulate Donna, my associate. She has just passed the highest level of exam that Intuit with QuickBooks offers in QuickBooks software and accounting theory. She's one of 3 in the Southeast region that has attained this goal. And we are very happy about that. And the only thing we have now is Washington, D.C. and the IRS. And at the moment, the Bush-era tax cuts are unresolved. Scrutiny of foreign bank accounts is on the rise. The payroll tax cut ends in February. Who knows what we're going to do next? And the IRS launches a volunteer program that is most important to everyone in this room, that are calling your people subcontractors, paying them by the hour when they're really employees. You may voluntarily step forward and properly classify them at this point to prevent 100% tax penalties, unless you're already under audit by the Labor Department. And what's going to make this happen to you, brilliant tax preparers are going to advise these people with 1099 forms, well, why don't you just fill out this form here, 8919, and you will only pay 5.65% self-employment tax instead of 13.3%. Of course, the IRS then will call up the employers and nail them. In addition to that, on a brighter note that's really sad, there are 100 tax-exempt entities with a Douglasville address that are no longer tax-exempt entities. So if you make a contribution to them, you will not be able to deduct it. And on that, y'all have a good day.
Thank you, Dennis, and we appreciate you and your firm for your support. Before we give thanks for our today's delicious lunch, I would like to offer a special thanks to Gabe's Downtown for catering. Now I would like to ask our Douglas County Commissioner of District 4, Ann Jones-Guider, to come up and lead us in invocation and pledge.
If you don't mind, I'd like to make a plug for the Character Coalition. I've brought some calendars, and they're on the desk as you leave go outside, and they're free. Please take one. Let's stand for the prayer, and please remain standing for the pledge. Our dear Heavenly Father, we just come to you today. We thank you, dear God, for all the blessings that you've bestowed upon us. You've given us blessings as a nation and as individuals. And dear God, let us always remember that. And dear God, as we hear the economic outlook today, the report, and we look to the future for 2012. May we all also look to your word, lean upon you for guidance, lean upon you for wisdom, and lean upon you for discernment. And dear Lord, we just pray that you will just heal our land. May we always look for your power and your understanding, and that we always honor you by following your word and by honoring you as our God and our Creator. We thank you this day for this food and the hands that have prepared it. And dear God, we just pray that it nourishes our bodies, that we may serve and glorify you. Amen. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As many of you know, the Chamber Diplomats are a group of 30 individuals who collectively represent the Chamber in the community at ribbon cuttings and events and many other ways behind the scenes. At this time, I would like to announce our Diplomat of the Quarter for the fourth quarter of 2011. Would Alicia Wilson please come forward and receive your plaque? It is now my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. William J. Smith. He is an economics professor at the University of West Georgia. Prior to coming to the University of West Georgia in 2006, he was a graduate instructor at Georgia State University's Department of Economics. Dr. Smith's education includes a BS degree in economics from the State University of West Georgia, a BA degree in philosophy from the State University of West Georgia, a master's degree in economics from Georgia State University, and his PhD in economics comes from Georgia State University. Dr. Smith is well known as one of the leading regional economic forecasters, and we are pleased to have him with us today. Please come forward.
It's a pleasure to be here. One of the things I have to say right off the bat is that it's incredible the size of the chamber here and the amount of participation. This is really impressive, and I can see that even though Douglas County is going through some hardships right now when it comes to the economy, it's not going to last very long. I imagine that by the time we come back here next year, y'all will have this auditorium across the street completely filled up with chamber members, and it's going to be just as impressive, if not more. Okay, let's start off by talking a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. So you always tell them what you're going to tell them, right? First of all, nothing has changed in terms of housing. In fact, in some ways, housing in Douglas County specifically has gotten just a little bit worse than it has been. Any of the industries that are related to the housing market continue to suffer. We're seeing anything related to building, construction. We're still losing jobs in those areas. It hasn't leveled off yet. And one of the problems that we're running into is that the population growth that we thought we were going to have in the West Georgia region, it hasn't materialized as predicted. So in an economy that focuses primarily on growth, population growth, we're just not seeing that population growth the way we had anticipated. Secondly, in total, we've seen losses in 4 of the 5 counties in the West Georgia region over the past year, but one of the things that you have to look on the bright side there, that means that one of the counties is actually displaying some sort of growth. Coweta County has seen growth in almost all areas. We've seen growth sporadically throughout different kinds of industries. It just hasn't materialized into overall growth yet for all 5 counties all the time. We've seen local revenue sources being greatly affected by the decline in the housing market. We were talking about this earlier. Local officials are having to do a whole lot more with a whole lot less. They've cut everything that they can, and right now a lot of local government officials, local school boards, they're having to effectively amputate areas that are seen as crucial services. So the difficulties there are not going to go away anytime in the near future. We're talking at least a couple of 3 years before local government is going to be able to say that they've gone into a recovery. Services in our area is really the industry that's spearheading the growth. Unfortunately, it's not happening here in Douglas County. Most of it's happening in places like Coweta County, Paulding County, and Carroll County. We're seeing a resurgence in services in those areas. One of the big problems facing Douglas County right now is that retail is in the service sector, and retail has been suffering greatly. And finally, it's not all bad news for a change. There's a lot of areas that we are seeing at least some growth in. Healthcare for the region has seen growth. We've seen automotive manufacturing growing like gangbusters. In fact, they can't keep up with the demand for new automobiles. And that probably is great news for some folks in here, because some people who will remain nameless provide some of the workers that go to those industries, Skip. So I'm sure that you're glad to see that these automotive sectors are on the rise. Let's look quickly at the nation. We're going to look at two things: the index of leading economic indicators and some employment and unemployment claims numbers. First of all, when we look at the leading economic indicators, this is really a broad measure of the direction of the economy. What we've seen is that over the past 3 years, it's been pointing in the upward direction with only sporadic downturns. So we've been saying for 3 years now that we're going to be out of the recession. And in fact, we are out of the recession nationally. It's just that locally we haven't seen the jobs return. We don't measure GDP on a local basis. We typically look at job growth in order to determine whether we're still in or out of a recession. And for the most part, our area has not yet seen that. We haven't seen the corner. The big contributors to this growth has been things that we haven't seen locally. Things like housing permits. Nationally, housing permits has actually turned around and started back in the upward direction. We haven't seen that happen here yet. Also, employment nationally has started to improve. We've seen unemployment rates fall and employment start to pick up, but we haven't seen that at least in Douglas County. One big area that we're seeing problems, though, is that industrial production has started to fall, and part of that's the fact that we have right now an overvalued dollar. We should have a lower valued dollar and we should be exporting more, but we're not. If we look at unemployment claims have been trending downward since the mid part of 2009. These are the new people entering the unemployment rolls, and both Georgia and the nation have seen unemployment claims, initial claims, going down for quite some time. Now you see a lot of bouncing around, but the trend is what we're concerned with. The trend has been in the downward direction, but the decline in unemployment claims has not yet translated into brand new jobs, because the unemployment rates have maintained at a fairly high level over the past couple of 3 years. Especially since about September 2009, you can see that the unemployment rate for Georgia, which is in the red, has just merely bounced around. And only recently have we seen it start to turn back in the downward direction. It's going to take several years for the unemployment rate to return to levels that we think of as being normal, anywhere from 4 to 6%. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen within this year. It's going to take probably a couple of years before we see 6 or 7% unemployment rates. Other news, consumer price index. People think that because we're pumping all this money into the economy that we're going to see a whole bunch of skyrocketing prices, but those also haven't materialized yet. You can see here the blue line represents the inflation rate, and the inflation rate has been hovering right around 3%. We see a little above 3, a little below 3. Right now, the inflation rate is right around 3.8%, and the core inflation rate is around 2%. Now, the core being everything but food and transportation, or food and fuel. And I know that everybody in here is probably in a situation where they don't have to use either one of those on a regular basis. So we'll simply focus on the overall inflation rate. That's the one that probably is more appropriate. One of the things to keep in mind is that we're afraid of inflation, but let's put this inflation rate in context with historical inflation. The historical inflation rate, this is going back to 1914, so it gives us the long view. Our inflation rate that we see in this last period is right here at the end. Okay, so we're not seeing a very high level of inflation relative to the past periods. In fact, if you look back to the 1970s and 80s, those look those look a lot more. I mean, obviously they're a lot higher than they are now. So we're not seeing the kind of inflation that people had anticipated, and that's a good thing. The problem also is that we really aren't seeing anything. We're not seeing the inflation rate pick up, but we're also not seeing people go back into the market and buy stuff. We're not seeing consumers really go back in and start spending again. Property taxes, as we said earlier, property taxes are going to continue to take a beating. Sales and use tax, however, has indicated a little bit more activity. We're buying a little more stuff in Georgia, but we haven't started buying like we did before the recession. And one of the problems that we're facing is that motor fuel taxes has given us some conflicting information here. It's not really conflicting, but it's not telling a great story. Okay, let's talk about state taxes for a minute. State taxes gives us a mirror on what's going to be happening locally. And what we've seen in the state taxes is that income tax rates are going up. This means that people are making more money. So in Georgia, we may not be putting people back to work, but people are making more money that are working. What does this mean? Well, what it typically means is that people are working longer hours and making higher wages. Doesn't necessarily mean they're making higher salaries, but they're making higher wages. We're not seeing a lot more people go into the labor market or return to the labor market, but those people who are working a lot longer hours. Does that pretty much jive with what everybody is in here are feeling? Anybody making more money and working less? Nobody. Okay, I guess I'm in the right location then, because sales tax is also up 5.4%. This indicates that not only are people making a little bit more money, but they're spending some of that money as well, and some of those tax revenues are going to be coming back to the local level. However, local sales tax distributions are lagging behind this, and part of this is groceries. In fact, a big chunk of it is groceries. We're not buying as much groceries as we were before, and we're not paying as much for them. We're shopping a lot harder and making our dollars go a lot further. In total, we've seen tax revenues over the past year, at least year to date through December, up 5.2%. And this is positive. I mean, by definition, it's positive, right? It's larger than zero. But the problem is we need faster growth than that in order to bring back the kind of services that we expected from our state government. Okay? Let's look at motor fuel taxes for just a second. Now, motor fuel taxes, there's two different components to the motor fuel tax. One is based on the number of gallons that Georgians consume, or people who drive through Georgia consume. The other is based on the price of fuel. And here's what the motor fuel tax is doing. The prepaid, this is the sales tax portion of it on the price, and the motor fuel excise tax is on the quantity of gasoline sold. We're seeing the prepaid tax going up a lot, and we're seeing the motor fuel excise tax going down, combining for a 6.1% increase in tax revenues. What that means is either we're driving a lot more fuel-efficient cars, which could be the case because we're buying a lot of cars recently, or it could be that we're simply paying a lot more for gasoline and driving a lot less. It's probably some combination of those two, but I would be willing to bet you it's more to the right hand than it is to the left hand. Now, property taxes at the state level don't represent a very large amount in terms of revenue, but the property taxes mirror what's going on at the local level. Last time we looked at the property taxes a couple of months ago, property taxes were down year to date about 36%, meaning that the property tax digests across the state on average were down about 36%. What we've seen more recently, year to date, is that property taxes are down about 13.4%. And this might not seem like a good thing, but 13.4% in decline is a lot better than 34 to 40%. So we're seeing some of those property taxes being paid. And some of this is because those properties are getting into the hands of people who can do something with them. They're not sitting on the balance sheet of a bank. They're not sitting on HUD's accounts. They're getting back into either investors or into homeowners' hands. And those investors or homeowners are actually starting to pay their taxes or pay taxes on those properties. So this is a good sign. Now, how did we get here? A lot of people think that we got here because we were simply, we had federal government intervention that created more housing than we could absorb, and that it started in 1999. Well, it turns out that it started a lot earlier than that. If you go back to 1995, we were already building more houses in 1995 than would keep up with the growth in population or the growth in income, and that persisted for about 10 years straight. So we were building too many houses, but the thing is, it was on the heels of having a housing shortage in the area. So what happened was a lot of contractors were trying to put more houses on tracks, on spec, to try to take advantage of the fact that they knew that people were going to move into the area. The problem is we had a lot of builders who were trying to all take advantage of that simultaneously. So we simply built too many houses for the population and for the income that was arriving in our area. And what's happened is these gray bars over here below to the right, this is where we stopped building. Okay, so this right here is the growth rate in single-family permits, and you can see they turned negative in 2006 and they haven't gotten back positive yet. Now, we talked about population. We haven't seen the population growth we expected. We thought we were going to be growing in this area at an increasing rate. In other words, that it was going to be curving upwards, okay, growing geometrically. But it's turned out that, at least in the West Georgia region, that we've started reaching a plateau, at least for the region wide. Okay, so what happens when it comes to housing when you're starting to plateau? We start demanding fewer houses, and we have, if we keep building, an excess supply. And we're still saddled with that excess supply. We've still got too many houses. And the reason we have too many houses is because now there's a lot of people that no longer qualify for those housing mortgages. They don't qualify for mortgages. 5 years ago, they would have been easy qualifications. They could have walked into a bank, they could have walked into a mortgage company, and they could have walked out with a mortgage, no problem. Now, you got to show 3 years of employment. It has to be continuous employment. You can't be moving around. That's tough. And those regulations are preventing a lot of new families from being able to start their life with a brand new house. And maybe that's a good thing. I mean, that's something that it may be a good thing that we're not allowing people that don't have those kinds of qualifications to purchase a house. But what's happened is that we've put a lot of people back in rental units. And in fact, a lot of the housing that we were building over this time frame, they weren't intended to be rental units, but they are now. A lot of the tract houses that we built that were intended to be single-family, owner-occupied houses are now not just multifamily, but they're rental-occupied housing. We have people who have multiple generations living in the same house in order to conserve resources. So here's what it looked like. 3 phases of the bubble. The first phase of the bubble, we saw demand exceeding supply. The upper line there is the gap, represents the upper portion of the gap. The lower line is single-family residential permits. So these are people moving to the area, and it's above the single-family houses that were being built. But what happened was, in about 1999, there was a crossover. In other words, supply and demand were about equal to one another, assuming that people who moved into our area were all going to equally purchase housing. In this area, supply started exceeding demand, and it did so for several years until we saw a collapse. And that collapse is not recovered yet. I mean, that's really where we are right now, is at the bottom. So what does it look like in terms of foreclosures? It hasn't gotten a whole lot better, but what we can say is that in some areas of the country it's gotten a little bit worse, so it makes us look a little better. And it's always good to be able to compare yourself with somebody who's doing worse, right? So at least we're not Nevada. The fact is we're now 6th. We've got 5 states that are in front of us: Nevada, California, Arizona. Wisconsin and Florida, we dropped out of 5th and into 6th place. Not much of a movement, but some movement. But one of the things to keep in mind is that when you look up here, through September, in the United States, we had 1 in every 605 households in foreclosure, or in some stage of foreclosure. In Georgia, it was 1 in 352. If you look at Douglas County, it was 1 in 168. So not only were we located in a bad state in terms of foreclosures, or are we located in a bad state in terms of foreclosures, we're substantially worse than most counties in the state that's a bad state in terms of foreclosures. So we're not doing very well. Okay? If you look at this map up here, it indicates that most of the foreclosures in Georgia have focused around the Atlanta area. This suburban ring around Atlanta, these are the areas that have been most affected by foreclosures. Now, in terms of Douglasville, about March of last year, we saw foreclosures just drop. Does anybody know why that happened? I bet I can point over here. I bet you know. They stopped. It wasn't they stopped lending money. Is that they stopped repossessing houses. Why did that happen? Well, what happened was about December of last year, the Justice Department got involved in the process of foreclosing on houses, and they said that we were moving a little bit too fast. We being banks were moving a little bit too fast in foreclosing on houses, and they were going to increase the amount of scrutiny involved in these foreclosures. And so what that did is it sent a chilling effect over all the banks, and all the banks that were in the process of doing foreclosures just simply shut their books and said, okay, we're going to hold off on this a while. We're going to check our paperwork. And this happened for a few months. April, May, June, July. About August, they felt comfortable with the processes they got in place. And what happened is foreclosures picked up right where they left off. In fact, they're a little bit higher now than they, in November, they were a little bit higher than they were when they left off. But December has actually started to trend in the downward direction. So, foreclosures, is it getting any better? There's no evidence that it's getting better. It's simply bouncing around right now, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that we're seeing more scrutiny from the national level. If we look at the price differential between foreclosures, what has happened is it's started to close the gap a little bit. Early on, there was about a 35 or 40% difference between a house that went into foreclosure and a house that was sold on the market. Right now, the gap is about 5%. Okay? At least in the last month, it's been about 5%. But over the last year, it's averaged about 25%. So for those people who are thinking about buying a house, you can get a 25% discount on a house by just simply going and looking through the foreclosure records. Doesn't sound like a bad deal. Anybody wonder why we're not building more houses right now? Because there's too many good deals out there. If you look at Douglas County, when it comes to foreclosure activity, the nation, about 0.16% of the housing is in foreclosure, in some stage of foreclosure. In Georgia, it's about 0.25%. In Douglas County, it's a little more than 0.5%, and that's almost 3 times. In fact, it's a little more than 3 times the national average. So Douglas County has not improved very much in that sense. Interestingly, though, foreclosures looks to be a bimodal distribution. We've got a lot of foreclosures that are occurring in houses that are about 1,200 to 1,400 square feet. These are houses that range from about $100,000, or did range from about $100,000 to about $140,000. That's actually moved up the food chain from where it was just a few years ago. A few years ago, it was $90,000 to $100,000 houses. So the foreclosures are moving into better houses and better neighborhoods. The interesting part is if you look at the foreclosures that are at 2,600 feet or larger, a big chunk of foreclosures is up there as well. And a lot of these are houses that were built that people had 2 incomes to support, and now they may only have 1. Delinquency rates. Now, it's all fine and good that foreclosures start to decline, but how are they going to decline over the long term? People have to start paying their loans, right? Delinquency rates are how we try to predict the foreclosure rates. And the delinquency rates here, if we look at the Atlanta area, it's hard to see because this map comes from the St. Louis Fed. And they don't do a lot in trying to delineate the differences between states. But if you look Over here, I'll just point to it real quickly. Right here. If you look in that area, this is the area surrounding the city of Atlanta, and we can see that the delinquency rate is still high in our area. We're still seeing a lot of mortgages that are becoming 60 and 90 days late. If you look at Douglas County specifically, right now the delinquency rate in Douglas County is 9.4%, meaning that 9.4% of mortgages are 90 days late or more. Okay? The U.S. average is about 5.3. In fact, the region average is about 6.5. So we're talking about Douglas County having a substantially higher delinquency rate than most. And that's up from last year. It's 1.8% above what it was last year. So we haven't started paying loans any quicker in Douglasville or Douglas County than we did last year. In fact, it's a little slower. So the problem is going to persist at least until those delinquency rates go away. Okay, now on to employment. Obviously, we're always looking for good employees, but right now, in terms of employers, it's a buyer's market. If you've got a job, you'll have 10 or 15 or 20 people applying for the job. Now, they may not have the qualifications for it, but you're going to get the applications. Okay, so what does employment look like? West Georgia's initial unemployment claims are still trending in the downward directions, but it's starting to flatten out a little bit. We're not seeing the reductions that we have seen in the past. If you look across the region, we've seen substantial declines over the past year. But the problem still persists that we don't have the jobs to reemploy these people. These are folks that have been unemployed for a while now. As I said, the unemployment rate is still the biggest problem. Once that unemployment rate really starts to drop, then we're going to start to see recovery in earnest in our area. If you look across these numbers here, it's hard to see all these at once, but I'm going to give it to you in a little shorter time frame so you can see this. In most of the counties, we're actually seeing in the West Georgia region, we're starting to see declines in the unemployment rate. And that's something that we haven't seen for a while. So the trend is in the downward direction. Up until last year, we had seen pretty much sideways movement. We'd maintained about a 10.5% unemployment rate in all counties but Coweta. Right now, every county except for Douglas has a sub-double-digit unemployment rate. It's below 10%. Right now, Douglas County is at 10.2. And over the next few months, there's a good possibility that all the counties in our region will see unemployment rates below 10%. One of the big problems that faces trying to attract industries into our area is the fact that we have such a persistently high unemployment rate. That says something about our workforce. Okay? When we look at the unemployment rates and the change in unemployment rates, our region is actually looking better than most. We had persistently high unemployment rates, but if you look here, the lighter shaded area are areas that have progressed more, that have lowered their unemployment rates more, and we're in that area that is grayish and white, meaning that we've seen our unemployment rates drop substantially over the past year. It's just that we haven't gotten them down to a point where we're really creating jobs. Where's the employment growth coming from? We're only getting it in a few places. If you look at Coweta County's seen employment increases in all major areas with the exception of government. In fact, if you look at government, every single county has suffered substantial losses over the past year. Substantial losses. In Carroll County, we've seen goods production up. In Coweta County, we've seen goods production up, but in Douglas County, it's still down. In fact, we're down across the board. The main thing to carry away from this, though, is that Douglas County just last year was suffering double-digit declines in employment. Now it's down to single digits. So that is an improvement. Okay? Georgia, we've seen Georgia goods production up. This is things like manufacturing. Now, a lot of people thought that manufacturing is dead, but manufacturing is actually making a resurgence in our area and our state. We're seeing improvements in those areas. Specifically, where is it happening in Douglas County? We've seen a lot of job losses in construction, and they're going to continue to hit. We're not going to get any uptick in construction until the housing turnaround is happening in earnest. and for probably a long period of time. Retail in Douglas County has taken a beating over the last year. The hope is that when we see the advanced numbers for retail over Christmas, this is going to give us some indication as to whether or not Douglas County's retail sector made a little bit of a rebound over Christmas time, because Christmas apparently was supposed to be pretty good across the nation. We're just not, we don't have the numbers in yet for local sales. One problem though is that we've seen a lot of declines in retail along Highway 5 and Highway 92, and even some declines around the mall. Another area, it won't stay up. Another area that we're seeing fairly large increases though is in real estate, finance, and insurance. Now finance, insurance, and real estate, this is the banking industry, real estate industry. You know, that was supposed to be all gone, right? Well, what's happened is banks and real estate agents have had to repurpose. There's a lot of real estate agents out there now who've become, rather than people who buy and sell houses, they're people who specialize in renting houses. There's a lot of folks now that have become property managers that used to be real estate agents. So there's been a shift. And the banks that have survived, those banks have been able to produce some gains in employment. We've seen that in more than a couple of counties locally. So those that have survived, they've actually made some inroads into a little bit of a recovery. And they're actually some making some profits too. One area that we've all been looking for growth has been healthcare. But healthcare in Douglas County has not been as resilient to the recession as in other counties. Healthcare has lost about 196 jobs over the past year. That's a 4.9% decline. And that's despite the fact that Douglas County just recently has gone through a renovation of the hospital, and the hospital now is in new hands. So some of that may be due to efficiency gains and a reduction in staffing because of that. But we are seeing growth in healthcare across the region, just not right now in Douglas County. In fact, if you look just over the past few years, people have been talking about healthcare as being the recession-proof industry. That's the reason everybody wants to attract healthcare jobs to their area. But you can see right there, the recession is in the box. If you look beyond that recession, or look at the last few months of the recession and onward, you can see that healthcare is not recession-proof, it's recession-resistant. It didn't decline as much as other industries did in the West Georgia region, but it did decline. And it has not grown consistently throughout the ending of the recession. So healthcare is not the panacea that we all would hope it would be. We have to go with a more multi-pronged approach if you're going to start seeking jobs that are recession-proof. Now, one of the things that we started doing in West Georgia in the Center for Business and Economic Research is we've started surveying people who do the hiring and the firing. These are HR managers in the West Georgia area. And what we've seen is the HR managers are actually pretty upbeat about what's going to be happening pretty soon in their companies. We surveyed about 40 HR managers locally and found that in the next 6 months, about 80% of them feel that the economy is going to be at least the same, if not better. In fact, some of them, about 62%, said that they have, their businesses have plans to expand their existing plant and equipment. Now, people don't typically invest if they don't feel like there's something to invest for. So these are the people, and you are the people who make those decisions about whether or not you're optimistic about the future, and optimism is contagious. The fact is, we've got more than half of our HR managers, at least half of those surveyed, more than half, indicate that they're optimistic about the future and they're spending on plant and equipment in order to take advantage of opportunities that are coming up. In addition to that, when they talk about anticipated employment, about 18% anticipate getting larger over the next 30 days. About 18% indicate they're going to be shrinking, and about 64% indicate that they're going to be staying about the same as they are right now. But that means that more than 3/4 of employers in the West Georgia region are not planning on shrinking or are planning on growing. Okay, so that's a pretty positive figure to look at. And the anticipated employment in 6 months out, when you look 6 months beyond the window of the survey, 55% expect to be growing over the next 6 months. So all of this together indicates that at least there's optimism, and they're planning on putting their money where their mouth is, and they're going to start building and hiring workers. Okay, so this is a very positive piece of news. So the folks that are in charge of hiring and firing, you think of those people as being the front lines. So to boil it down, building permits and foreclosures, they still look atrocious. We're not going to be recovering from that anytime in the near future. We're talking at the very least 3 to 5 years out. Unemployment claims are looking better, but they're not as good as they could be. Unemployment rates are still poor, even though they've turned in the right direction. We're still almost 10% across the region. Manufacturing employment has actually held its own in our area. We've seen some counties with reductions in manufacturing, but some counties have seen growth, and manufacturing is considered a bellwether for the local economy. Service employment has been performing better. Healthcare across the region is up. However, for Douglas County, it's not up, it's down. One area that we didn't talk very much on was temp jobs. Temp jobs have actually made substantial increases over the past year or so, and temp jobs represent optimism in the future, because what they're doing is they're hiring these people on a temporary basis, and hopefully at some point they're going to transition into full-time employment. And HR directors, their outlook is generally positive. So all in all, the future is opportunity. Okay? Over the next couple of years, the big difference between what happens here in Douglas County and what happens in the region is how you're able to take advantage of those opportunities that are out there. There's lots of opportunities in the housing market. One thing I keep talking about is that when housing prices are at the levels that they are right now, there's nothing but opportunities. The big problem that is that nobody's looking at it that way. They're always looking at it as being a depressed market. And thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Yes, sir.
Which industries do you think have the most promise for this area?
Well, truthfully, I know I was downplaying healthcare, but healthcare is one of the industries that is going to be big pretty much anywhere. The reason it's going to be big is because we've got an aging population. It's not affecting this crowd at all, but it's an aging population, and those kinds of services are going to be a big component of our local economy and any local economy. Yes, ma'am. It is available online, and I can put sources in so that you can go and look directly at the places that I got the data.
We'll link to it off our Facebook site. We can link to it so that you...
Yes, ma'am.
When are you planning on getting the sales report from Christmas? When will we see those kind of figures?
The advanced sales reports that come out are usually a month and a half behind, so it'll be the middle of February before we know exactly what's happened at Christmas time.
Will that kind of figure be on the website that would be linked through Facebook?
It will eventually be on the website. The only thing is it won't be part of this presentation. What I do is I update the presentation on a monthly basis so that if you link directly to the presentation, then you'll get the most up-to-date presentation.
It's reported this year, by the end of the year, we'll be at above $16 trillion on a national debt level and pushing rates relative to GDP above, where we have not been since World War II. What are your thoughts on the debt level, and what do you anticipate happening to try to turn that trend in the other direction?
Well, the only thing we can do to get out of debt is to either raise taxes or grow. And right now, I don't think there's anybody in the room that probably is pushing for higher taxes. We could spend less. That's correct. But the problem is there are certain areas that, well, let's just put it this way. When it comes to deciding where to cut, nobody's in agreement. Lots of folks are trying to target different services at the national level that cost a lot of money, but one of those services is military. It commands a big chunk of our budget, and we tend to use that a lot. So where we cut, that's actually up to voters.
What do you anticipate with the gasoline prices, and how will that affect things in the next,
Well,
continue to rise?
gasoline prices are probably going to remain fairly stable over the next year, but stable means between $3 and $4. We've had to reevaluate what the word stable means in terms of gasoline since Hurricane Katrina. Right now, we're talking about $100 a barrel for crude oil, and we're probably not going to see anything much more than about $115 a barrel over the next year. But any turmoil in the Middle East, any hint of a problem in oil-producing countries, and even if there is no problem in supply, there's always a problem in price. The speculation there is a real difficult thing to get your arms around. One last.
Dr. Smith, let me ask you something if I can and get your thoughts on it. Once I recovered from the first part of it, two of the things that to me, take away from what you just said was that there's a trend for the next 6 months that's trending up, correct? Or,
A trend in what?
well, a trend in the outlook and what the HR people are looking at and the potential for recovery, and that you said that there's opportunity. And what do we do to take advantage of that?
Well, one of the things that we talked about earlier is that there's a lot of housing out there. And I think there's a big problem in that those inventories of housing isn't adequately put in front of the faces of people who are willing to invest in them. There's a lot of folks out there sitting on the sidelines with a lot of cash in their pockets that are waiting for opportunities to make a lot more money with it than they can get out of a bank account. Sorry, bankers. But I'm sure a lot of bankers here would be perfectly happy for them to take that money and invest in housing if they can take that housing off of their balance sheets. But there's lots of opportunities for housing still today. And so when it comes to those kinds of opportunities, they just have to be recognized, and they also have to be promoted locally. If y'all have got a large inventory of housing, the best thing that you can do is make those public, make the inventories public so that people can peruse them at their leisure and decide what kind of investments they want to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for taking time out of busy schedule to join us today. He will be available after the conclusion
Sure.
of the program to answer any other questions. I'm sorry I had to cut it off, but we're running kind of behind. A couple of quick reminders. The Chamber is accepting Leadership Douglas applications for 2013 class. If you are interested in participating or learning more, please see Callie. One very important reminder before you leave the day, the Chamber's annual awards banquet, sponsored by West Georgia Technical College, is Saturday, February the 4th at the Center at Arbor Connection. This year's awards banquet will sell out very quickly. There's less than 40 seats remaining. Please see Kimberly Weaver before you leave the day if you would like to reserve your seats. Thanks again to the City of Douglasville for the use of Downtown Douglasville Conference Center, to Gabe's Downtown for the great food, to T. Dennis Connolly for sponsoring today's luncheon, and to Greystone Power for their naming sponsorship. Thanks to all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next Thursday for our AT&T Business Hour located at the City of Douglasville Public Safety Building. Thanks, and everyone have a great afternoon.